I've always been drawn to the thrill of exploring abandoned places. There's something about the decay and neglect that speaks to me, a sense of history and mystery that I find irresistible. So, when I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin deep in the woods, I knew I had to investigate. I gathered my friends, Alex and Rachel, and we set off early one morning, eager to uncover the secrets of the cabin. The woods were dense and quiet, the only sound being the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. As we approached the cabin, I could feel a sense of excitement building inside me. What would we find? Would it be a treasure trove of antiques, or a haunting reminder of lives left behind? The cabin was old, its wooden boards weathered to a soft gray. We pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside, our flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air was musty, filled with the scent of decay and rot. But as we began to explore, we found something unexpected. Old photographs and personal belongings scattered throughout the cabin. There were pictures of a family, smiling and happy, but also ones of a solitary figure, standing in the woods with an unsettling intensity. We found old letters, tied with a faded ribbon, and a journal belonging to someone named Eleanor. As we delved deeper into the cabin, it felt like we were uncovering a piece of history, a story that had been left untold for decades. As we prepared to leave, I realized I had left my phone behind. I told my friends to go ahead, that I would catch up with them after I retrieved my phone. They nodded, and I watched as they disappeared into the trees. I returned to the cabin, expecting it to be as we had left it. But as I approached, I noticed something strange. The door was locked. I was certain we had left it open. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized I was alone, with no way to communicate with my friends. I decided to break in, curiosity getting the better of me. As I entered the cabin, I was met with an eerie silence. But it was what I saw next that made my blood run cold. All the photographs were now of me and my friends, standing in the very spots we had explored just hours before. There was a note on the table, written in a handwriting that seemed to match the journal we had found. "You should not have come here," it read. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. How was this possible? Who could have done this? The fear that gripped me was not just of being watched, but of being manipulated by an unseen presence. It was as if our actions had been controlled, our every move anticipated. As I stood there frozen in terror, I heard a creaking sound. It was the door, slowly opening by itself. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one. The wind rustled through the trees outside, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard a whisper. "Welcome home," it seemed to say. I ran out of the cabin, not stopping until I was back with my friends. We packed up our gear and left the woods as fast as we could, the fear of being watched lingering long after we were gone. But even as we drove away, I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being followed. Every glance in the rearview mirror made me jump, every strange noise making me wonder if we were truly alone. It wasn't until we were back home, safe in our own beds, that I realized the horrifying truth. The cabin had been waiting for us all along, its secrets and mysteries designed to lure us in. And as I lay there, trying to process the terror of what we had experienced, I heard a knock at the door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Who could it be? I slowly got out of bed and approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. As I opened the door, I was met with an empty hallway. But on the floor, there was a small package with my name on it. Inside, I found a photograph of us standing in front of the cabin, with a note attached. "You will always be here," it read. And with that, everything went black. When I came to, it was morning, and the sun was shining through my window. It was just a dream, I told myself. But as I looked around my room, I realized that something was off. The window was open, and there was a faint scent of wood smoke in the air. I rushed to the window and looked out, and that's when I saw it. The cabin, standing in the distance, its door open, inviting me back. I knew then that I had not imagined it all. The cabin had been real, and it had been waiting for me all along. The fear that gripped me was not just of being watched, but of being trapped in a nightmare from which I might never awaken. As I reflect on that terrifying experience, I am reminded of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of our everyday lives. The cabin, once a place of curiosity and adventure, had become a portal to a realm of horror, a place where the living are not welcome. And I, Mark, had become a part of it, forever bound to the secrets it holds. The memory of the cabin haunts me still, a constant reminder of the fear that grips us when we realize we are not alone. And sometimes when I look over my shoulder, I swear I can still see it, standing in the woods, waiting for me. The fear of being manipulated by an unseen presence is a primal one, a fear that taps into our deepest insecurities. But what's even more terrifying is the thought that our actions might not be our own, that we might be mere pawns in a game controlled by forces beyond our understanding. And as I sit here, writing this story, I wonder if the cabin is still out there, waiting for its next victim. The thought sends shivers down my spine, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that lurk in the shadows, but the ones that sit right next to us, smiling and waiting. I've always loved camping, not just for the solitude and connection with nature, but also for the camaraderie that comes with sharing a campsite with fellow travelers. There's something about sitting around a roaring fire, swapping stories and laughter that makes you feel like you're part of a community. So, when I arrived at the crowded campsite on that summer night, I was excited to meet new people and make some friends. As I set up my tent, I noticed a guy sitting by himself near the edge of the campsite. He seemed friendly enough, but there was something about him that kept him apart from the rest of us. Maybe it was the way he kept to himself, or the way he watched everyone with an intensity that made you feel like you were under a microscope. Despite my initial reservations, I decided to introduce myself. His name was Mike, and he seemed nice enough, though a bit reserved. We chatted for a while, exchanging stories about our travels and sharing a laugh or two. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something strange. Mike was always watching me, even when he thought no one was looking. At first, I dismissed it as mere curiosity, but as the hours passed, I began to feel a creeping sense of unease. It was as if Mike was studying me, waiting for something to happen. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but the feeling lingered. As we sat around the campfire, swapping ghost stories and enjoying the warmth of the flames, I caught Mike staring at me again. This time I felt a shiver run down my spine. There was something in his eyes, something that made me feel like I was being hunted. I decided to take a walk around the campsite, hoping to clear my head and shake off the feeling of being watched. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the sense that Mike was following me, his eyes fixed on me even in the darkness. I returned to the campfire, trying to act normal, but my mind was racing. Who was this guy? And what did he want from me? As the night wore on, Mike excused himself, saying he needed to get some rest. I watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and trepidation. The next morning, I woke up early, eager to start my day. But as I looked around the campsite, I realized that Mike was gone. His tent was packed up, and there was no sign of him anywhere. I felt a pang of disappointment, wondering if I had misjudged him. But then I saw it. A note tucked into my tent flap with a single sentence written on it. "I've been waiting for you." My heart skipped a beat as I read the words, a chill running down my spine. Who was Mike, really? And what did he mean by those ominous words? I felt like I had been stalked, like I had unknowingly been part of some twisted game. The fear that gripped me was not just of being watched, but of being hunted by someone who blended seamlessly into the crowd. As I packed up my gear and left the campsite, I couldn't shake off the feeling that Mike was still out there, watching me. Every stranger I passed on the road made me jump. Every glance in my direction made me feel like I was being tracked. It wasn't until I was back home, safe in my own bed, that I realized the horrifying truth. Mike wasn't just a stranger. He was a ghost from my past, a figure who had been waiting for me all along. And as I lay there, trying to process the terror of what I had experienced, I heard a knock at the door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Who could it be? I slowly got out of bed and approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. As I opened the door, I was met with an empty hallway. But on the floor, there was a small piece of paper with a single sentence written on it. "I'm still waiting." And with that, everything went black. When I came to, it was morning, and the sun was shining through my window. It was just a dream, I told myself, But as I looked around my room, I realized that something was off. The window was open, and there was a faint scent of smoke in the air. I rushed to the window and looked out, and that's when I saw him. Mike, standing across the street, watching me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I knew then that I had not imagined it all. Mike was real, and he had been waiting for me all along. The fear that gripped me was not just of being stalked, but of being trapped in a nightmare from which I might never awaken. As I reflect on that terrifying experience, I am reminded of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of our everyday lives. The campsite, once a place of camaraderie and joy, had become a setting for a chilling game of cat and mouse. And I, Jack, had become the unwitting pawn in a game that seemed to have no end. The memory of Mike haunts me still, a constant reminder of the fear that grips us when we realize we are not alone. And sometimes, when I look over my shoulder, I swear I can still see him, watching me, waiting for me. The fear of being stalked is a primal one, a fear that taps into our deepest insecurities. But what's even more terrifying is the thought that the stalker might not just be a stranger, but someone who has been waiting for you all along, blending into the crowd, watching and waiting. And as I sit here writing this story, I wonder if Mike is still out there, watching me, waiting for his next move. The thought sends shivers down my spine, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that lurk in the shadows, but the ones that sit right next to us, smiling and waiting. Camping has always been a tradition for our family, a way to disconnect from the hustle and bustle of daily life and reconnect with nature and each other. This year was no different, as we packed up our gear and headed to a beautiful campsite near a serene lake. My children, Emily and James, were bubbling with excitement, eager to spend their days swimming and exploring the woods. As the sun began to set on our first day, we settled in for a cozy night by the campfire. The kids were playing near the lake, laughing and chasing each other, while my husband and I sat back to enjoy the peacefulness of the evening. But as the darkness deepened, I realized that James was nowhere to be seen. "Where's James?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. My husband and I exchanged a worried glance, and we quickly called out for James, but there was no response. We searched the campsite, calling his name, but he was nowhere to be found. The lake, once a place of tranquility, now seemed ominous, its silence oppressive. Panic set in as we realized James was truly missing. We alerted the other campers, and soon a group of us were combing the woods, searching for any sign of him. The darkness seemed to swallow us whole, every snap of a twig making us jump, our hearts racing with anticipation. As the hours ticked by, the search grew more desperate. We called the park rangers and they joined the search, but there was no sign of James. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Just when we thought all hope was lost, a fisherman approached us, his face grave with concern. "I think I saw a child matching your son's description on the other side of the lake," he said. He was alone, but he seemed okay. We rushed to the other side of the lake, our hearts filled with a mix of hope and fear. But when we arrived, James was nowhere to be seen. It was as if he had disappeared again, leaving us with more questions than answers. The night was a blur of tears and desperation, our minds racing with the worst possible scenarios. Where was James? Was he safe? The uncertainty was suffocating, making it hard to breathe. The next day I received a call from an unknown number. My heart leapt with hope as I answered, praying that it would be James on the other end. And then I heard his voice, clear as day. "Mom, I'm home," he said, before the line went dead. I was paralyzed with fear. How was this possible? James was still missing, and yet his voice was on the other end of the line. I tried calling back, but the number was no longer in service. As the days turned into weeks, we continued to search for James, but there was no sign of him. The police were involved, and the campsite was combed again and again, but he seemed to have vanished into thin air. And then the calls started. Every day, I would receive a call from an unknown number, with James's voice on the other end. "Mom, I'm home," he would say, before hanging up. It was as if he was trying to tell me something, but I had no idea what. The fear that gripped me was not just of losing my child, but of the uncertainty of his safety. Was he in the hands of someone sinister, Was he being held against his will? The not knowing was the worst part, a constant torment that haunted me every waking moment. As I sat by the campfire one night, staring into the flames, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, expecting to see one of the rangers or a fellow camper, but there was no one there. The fire crackled, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw James standing just beyond the light, his eyes watching me. I spun around, but he was gone. It was just my imagination, I told myself. But the feeling lingered, the feeling of being watched. And then, one night, I received another call. This time, James's voice was different. It was older, more menacing. "Mom, I'm home," he said, his voice dripping with an evil intent that made my blood run cold. "And I've been waiting for you." The line went dead, and I was left with a chilling realization. James was not just missing. He was gone, consumed by something sinister that had been waiting for him all along. And as I sat there, frozen in terror, I realized that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that lurk in the shadows, but the ones that wear the faces of our loved ones. As I reflect on that terrifying experience, I am reminded of the fragility of life and the horrors that can lurk in the most unexpected places. The campsite, once a place of joy and adventure, had become a setting for a chilling nightmare. And I, Sarah, had become a part of it, forever trapped in a cycle of fear and uncertainty. The memory of James haunts me still, a constant reminder of the terror that grips us when we lose someone we love. And sometimes when I look over my shoulder, I swear I can still see him, watching me, waiting for me. The fear of losing a loved one is a primal one, a fear that taps into our deepest insecurities. But what's even more terrifying is the thought that they might not just be lost, but in the hands of something sinister, something that wears their face but is not them at all. And as I sit here, writing this story, I wonder if James is still out there, watching me, waiting for his next move. The thought sends shivers down my spine, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that lurk in the shadows, but the ones that sit right next to us, smiling and waiting. I've always been fascinated by the world of radio broadcasting. There's something about the static-filled airwaves and the voices that seem to come from nowhere that captivates me. So, when I decided to spend a few nights camping in a remote site with no cell service, I knew I had to bring my trusty portable radio along. The campsite was perfect, surrounded by dense woods and a serene lake. It was the epitome of solitude. My friends and I spent our days hiking and swimming, enjoying the peace and quiet of the wilderness. But as night began to fall, I pulled out my radio, eager to tune into some old broadcasts. As I scanned through the frequencies, I stumbled upon a strange signal. It was an old radio broadcast, the kind you'd expect to hear from decades ago. The announcer's voice was grave, warning of a tragedy that had occurred at a campsite not far from our location. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I listened. The announcer spoke of a fire that had swept through the campsite, claiming the lives of everyone there. But what really caught my attention was the location he mentioned. It was our exact campsite. I tried to brush it off as mere coincidence, but the fear began to creep in. Why was this broadcast playing now, in this place? I tried to turn off the radio, but it wouldn't stop playing. The announcer's voice grew more urgent, warning listeners to leave the campsite immediately. As I listened, I started to feel a sense of unease. It was as if the broadcast was speaking directly to me, warning me of a danger that was imminent. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just an old recording, but the words seemed to echo in my mind long after the broadcast ended. But then, something strange happened. The radio started playing again, and this time, it was my own voice I heard. "Rachel, get out of there," it said. "You have to leave now." I was paralyzed with fear. How was this possible? I had never recorded anything on this radio before. It was as if I was hearing a message from my future self, warning me of a tragedy that was about to unfold. I tried to turn off the radio again, but it wouldn't stop playing. The voice grew more urgent, more desperate. "Rachel, please, you have to escape." I knew then that I had to get out of there. I packed up my gear and told my friends we had to leave. They were skeptical at first, but as I explained what had happened, they began to feel the fear too. As we packed up our campsite, I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being watched. Every snap of a twig made us jump, every strange noise making us wonder if we were truly alone. We left the campsite as fast as we could, not stopping until we were back in civilization. But even as we drove away, I couldn't shake off the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something terrible. It wasn't until we were back home, safe in our own beds, that I realized the horrifying truth. The radio broadcast had not been just a warning. It was a message from the past, a message that had been sent to prevent a tragedy from occurring again. And as I lay there, trying to process the terror of what I had experienced, I heard the radio playing again in my mind. "Rachel, you should not have come here," it seemed to say. I sat up with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. It was just a dream, I told myself. But as I looked around my room, I realized that something was off. The window was open, and there was a faint scent of smoke in the air. I rushed to the window and looked out, and that's when I saw it. The campsite, standing in the distance, its trees ablaze with a fire that seemed to be spreading fast. I knew then that I had not imagined it all. The radio broadcast had been real, and it had been warning me of a tragedy that was meant to occur. And as I watched the fire consume the campsite, I realized that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that lurk in the shadows, but the ones that speak to us through the static-filled airwaves, warning us of dangers that are yet to come. As I reflect on that terrifying experience, I am reminded of the power of radio broadcasting and the mysteries it holds. The campsite, once a place of peace and tranquility, had become a setting for a chilling nightmare. And I, Rachel, had become a part of it, forever bound to the secrets it keeps. The memory of the radio broadcast haunts me still, a constant reminder of the fear that grips us when we realize we are not alone. And sometimes, when I tune into an old frequency, I swear I can still hear my own voice, warning me of dangers that lurk in the shadows of our reality. The fear of being trapped in a place with a dark history is a primal one, a fear that taps into our deepest insecurities. But what's even more terrifying is the thought that we might be reliving a tragedy that has already occurred, that our actions are not our own, but part of a script that has been written long before we were born. And as I sit here, writing this story, I wonder if the radio is still out there, broadcasting its warnings to anyone who will listen. The thought sends shivers down my spine, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that lurk in the shadows, but the ones that speak to us through the static-filled airwaves, warning us of dangers that are yet to come. I still remember that night, like it was yesterday. The dense forest, lit only by the flickering flames of our campfire, seemed to whisper secrets to us as we huddled together, swapping stories of adventure and bravery. It was a ritual we had followed for years, a group of friends venturing into the wilderness to reconnect with nature and each other. But this trip was different. This trip was about Alex, my friend, my confidant, and an experienced hiker who had decided to take a solo hike during the day. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, we started to worry. Alex was always punctual, always returned before nightfall. But as the hours ticked by and the darkness deepened, there was no sign of him. We tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. The forest, once a place of tranquility, now seemed ominous, its silence oppressive. "Guys, we need to find him," I said, my voice laced with concern. He wouldn't just disappear like this. We quickly gathered our flashlights and set out into the darkness, calling out Alex's name. The forest responded with nothing but the echo of our voices, a haunting reminder of how small we were against its vastness. As we walked, the trees seemed to close in around us, their branches creaking ominously in the wind. Every snap of a twig made us jump, our hearts racing with anticipation. After what felt like hours of searching, we stumbled upon Alex's backpack, lying abandoned near an old abandoned mine. It was as if he had just vanished into thin air. The mine loomed before us, its entrance a dark mouth that seemed to swallow all light. We hesitated, unsure if we should venture inside, but something compelled us to explore it. As we stepped into the mine, the air grew colder, the darkness more profound. Our flashlights cast eerie shadows on the walls, making it seem like we were being followed by unseen figures. Every step echoed through the tunnel, making us feel like intruders in a place that was meant to remain hidden. But we found nothing. No sign of Alex, no clue as to where he might have gone. It was as if he had never been there at all. We left the mine, our hearts heavy with worry, and returned to the campsite to wait for dawn. Days passed, and the search for Alex continued. Park rangers combed the forest, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had disappeared into the very fabric of the forest. Then, one morning, a park ranger approached us with a somber expression. "We found something," he said, his voice low and serious. "Alex's camera. It was near the mine." Our hearts leapt with hope, but as the ranger handed us the camera, our excitement turned to confusion. The last photo on the camera was of Alex, standing in front of the mine, a smile on his face. But the timestamp was what chilled us to the bone. It was taken hours after he went missing. "How is this possible?" I asked, my mind racing with questions. The ranger shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe he managed to take the photo before whatever happened to him." But I knew Alex. He wouldn't just take a photo and leave his backpack behind. Something was off, something that didn't add up. As we delved deeper into the mystery, we began to experience strange occurrences. Equipment would go missing, and we would hear whispers in the wind, whispers that sounded like Alex's voice. It was as if he was trying to communicate with us, to tell us something. One night, as I sat by the campfire, staring into the flames, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends, but there was no one there. The fire crackled, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw Alex standing just beyond the light, his eyes watching me. I spun around, but he was gone. It was just my imagination, I told myself. But the feeling lingered, the feeling of being watched. As the days turned into weeks, we realized that we might never find Alex. The forest had taken him, and it seemed determined to keep it secret. But I couldn't shake off the feeling that Alex was still out there, watching us, waiting for us to uncover the truth. And then one night, I received a call. It was from an unknown number, and all I could hear was static. But then, a voice whispered my name. It was Alex's voice, unmistakable. "Find me," he whispered before the line went dead. I was paralyzed with fear. How was this possible? Alex was gone, and yet his voice was on the other end of the line. I tried calling back, but the number was no longer in service. It was then that I realized the horrifying truth. Alex wasn't just missing, he was trapped in some kind of limbo, a place where time had no meaning. The photo, the whispers, the call, it was all him, trying to reach out from beyond the veil of reality. As I sat there, my mind reeling with the implications, I felt a chill run down my spine. The forest, once a place of adventure, had become a portal to a realm where the living were not welcome. And Alex, my friend, was now a part of it, forever trapped in a world that was not our own. The fire crackled, and I could have sworn I heard Alex's voice again, whispering my name. But this time, it was different. This time, it was a warning. "Get out while you still can," he whispered, and with that, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying by the campfire, my friends staring at me with concern. It was just a dream, they told me. But I knew better. The forest had spoken, and I had listened. We packed up our gear and left the forest that day, never to return. But the memory of Alex and the chilling truth about his disappearance will haunt me forever. The forest may have taken him, but it had also left us with a terrifying realization. Some secrets are better left unexplored. As I look back on that fateful trip, I realize that the forest taught us a lesson. It showed us that there are places where humans are not meant to tread, secrets that are better left buried. And Alex, my friend, became a part of that secret, a reminder of the horrors that lie just beyond the edge of our reality. The forest remains, a silent witness to the mysteries it holds. And sometimes when the wind blows through its trees, I swear I can still hear Alex's voice, whispering my name, reminding me of the terror that lurks in the shadows of the unknown. I've always been drawn to the woods, to the way the sunlight filters through the leaves and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. It's a place where I feel most at peace, most connected to nature. So, when I decided to spend a few nights camping in a secluded spot, I was excited to immerse myself in the tranquility of the forest. The campsite was perfect, surrounded by tall trees that seemed to whisper secrets to each other in the breeze. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as the days passed, I began to notice something strange. The whispers seemed to be calling my name. Emily, they would whisper, softly at first, but growing louder and more urgent with each passing night. I tried to brush it off as mere imagination, but the sound was unmistakable. It was as if the forest itself was summoning me, drawing me deeper into its heart. I felt a shiver run down my spine every time I heard it, but I couldn't help feeling curious. What could the forest want from me? One night, I decided to follow the sound. I packed a flashlight and set off into the darkness, the whispers growing clearer with each step. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches creaking ominously in the wind. Every snap of a twig made me jump, my heart racing with anticipation. As I walked, the whispers grew louder, until I could feel the words vibrating through my very being. Emily, come closer. I followed the sound, my flashlight casting eerie shadows on the trees. The forest seemed to be leading me somewhere, but I had no idea where. Suddenly, the trees parted, and I found myself standing in a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was an old, weathered headstone. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I saw it. The name on the headstone was mine, Emily. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. How was this possible? I had never been to this place before, and yet here was my name, etched into a grave that seemed to have been here for decades. The whispers stopped, and an unsettling silence fell over the forest. I stood there, frozen in terror, as the realization dawned on me. The forest had been calling me to this place, to this grave, for a reason. It was as if my fate had already been sealed, and I was merely following the path that had been laid out for me. As I turned to leave, I heard the whispers again, this time louder than ever. You should not have come here, they seemed to say. I ran back to my campsite, not stopping until I was safely inside my tent. But even there, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The forest seemed to be closing in around me, its whispers growing more urgent by the minute. I knew I had to leave, to get out of there before it was too late. As I packed up my gear, I noticed something strange. The trees seemed to be leaning in, their branches tangling together in a way that seemed almost deliberate. It was as if they were trying to trap me, to keep me from leaving. I ran, not stopping until I was back in my car, speeding away from the forest as fast as I could. But even as I drove, I could feel the forest's presence, its whispers echoing in my mind. It wasn't until I was miles away, safe in my own bed, that I realized the horrifying truth. The forest had been calling me to my own grave, a grave that had been waiting for me all along. And as I lay there, trying to process the terror of what I had experienced, I heard the whispers one last time. Emily, they whispered, softly but unmistakably, you will return. And with that, everything went black. When I came to, it was morning, and the sun was shining through my window. It was just a dream, I told myself. But as I looked around my room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On my bedside table, there was a small piece of paper with a single word written on it, soon. I knew then that the forest had left its mark on me, that I would never be able to escape its call. And as I sat there, frozen in terror, I realized that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that lurk in the shadows, but the ones that whisper our names in the wind. As I reflect on that terrifying experience, I am reminded of the power of nature and the mysteries it holds. The forest, once a place of peace and tranquility, had become a realm of horror, a place where the living are not welcome. And I, Emily, had become a part of its dark legend, forever bound to the whispers that call my name. The forest remains, a silent witness to the secrets it keeps. And sometimes when the wind blows through its trees, I swear I can still hear the whispers, reminding me of the terror that lies just beyond the edge of our reality.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.